What is the true measure of a man? Is it the cut of his suit, the number of zeros in his net worth, or the empire he commands from a glass tower that scrapes the sky? For Julian Vance, a man who moved markets with a whisper and whose name was synonymous with ruthless innovation, the answer had always been control. Absolute, unwavering control over his world, his company, and his own hermetically sealed existence. Until a cold November night in Chicago, a city he viewed more as a collection of assets than a home, he saw a ghost, not of the spectral kind, but of a life he had long since buried. A face from the hallowed, merciless halls of Northwood Preparatory School, now framed by the harsh fluorescent lights of a 24-hour diner. A face etched with a fatigue so profound, it seemed to have settled deep into her bones. She was a waitress, her uniform faded, her hands betraying a history of hard labor. He was Julian Vance, the titan of venture capital. And as he sat shrouded in the anonymity of a borrowed coat, he was confronted with a choice that would ignite a dormant past, unravel the very fabric of his carefully constructed reality, and unleash a tempest that threatened to consume them both. What he did next wasn't an act of charity, it was the lighting of a fuse. The wind howled off Lake Michigan with a feral, biting anger. It was the kind of Chicago wind that found every seam in a person's clothing and reminded them of their own fragile warmth. From his duplex penthouse atop the newly erected St. Regis Tower, Julian Vance watched the city lights smear and glitter below, a sprawling, indifferent galaxy. Down there, millions of lives played out their dramas, their triumphs, their heartbreaks. Up here, there was only the whisper of the ventilation system and the low, predatory hum of his Bloomberg terminal. At 34, Julian was the undisputed king of his domain. His firm, Vance Capital, didn't just invest in technology, it consumed it, restructured it, and birthed new industries from the bones of the old. He had a mind like a diamond cutter, precise and unyielding. He had a portfolio that could alter the course of nations, a garage full of vintage Aston Martins he never drove, and a list of contacts that read like a global power index. What he didn't have, he was beginning to realize, was a single reason to attend the philanthropic ball being held in his honor that evening. The very thought of it, the clinking glasses, the false smiles of rivals, the saccharine speeches praising his calculated generosity, was more nauseating than a market correction. He loosened the perfectly dimpled knot of his Brioni tie. It felt like a hangman's noose. "Caroline," he spoke into his phone, his voice a flat baritone that betrayed no emotion. "Cancel the gala. An urgent matter with the Tokyo Fund. Something non-negotiable." On the other end, his executive assistant, a woman who could anticipate his needs before he could articulate them, didn't so much as pause. "Of course, Mr. Vance. Shall I have the chef at Alinea send something up for you?" A strange, almost rebellious impulse seized him. "No," he said, the word feeling foreign on his tongue. "No, I think I'll go out." The silence that followed was more eloquent than any question. Julian Vance did not go out. He made appearances. He attended summits. He occupied tables. The last time he'd spontaneously walked into a public establishment for a meal was likely before he could legally drink. He shrugged off the bespoke suit jacket, exchanging it for a simple, dark cashmere peacoat he kept for incognito trips to the airport. He left his Patek Philippe on the dresser, took a few thousand in cash from a safe, and put on a plain gray beanie, pulling it low over his brow. He wanted to be a phantom, a non-entity in the city he commanded. The private elevator descended 93 floors in a silent, cushioned rush. The lobby was an imposing cavern of Italian marble and abstract art that cost more than the average suburban home. The doorman, a former Marine named Michael, stepped forward with a large black umbrella. "Mr. Vance, your car is ready." "Not tonight, Michael," Julian said, his voice muffled by the cap. "I'm walking." He stepped into the brutal wind before Michael could argue, the cold a welcome shock to his system. It felt real. He walked with no destination, letting the city's cacophony wash over him. He passed Michelin-starred restaurants where sommeliers poured liquid history into delicate glasses, past velvet-roped clubs throbbing with manufactured joy, past theaters spilling patrons in furs and jewels onto the slick pavement. It was his world, and none of it felt like his. He turned off Michigan Avenue, then down a darker street, the gleaming facades of luxury retail giving way to old brick and wrought iron. He was in a part of the city that was real, that had grit and memory. And it was there, tucked between a dusty antique shop and a laundromat breathing steam into the cold air, that he saw it, the Greasy Spoon. The sign was a faded, hand-painted affair, a relic from another time. The windows were fogged with condensation, promising a haven from the relentless wind. It was the kind of place his grandfather, a steel worker with hands like leather, would have called honest. On an impulse he couldn't explain, he pushed open the heavy wooden door. A small, tinny bell announced his arrival. The air inside was a rich tapestry of scents, sizzling bacon, brewing coffee, wet wool, and something indefinably comforting, like toast. A handful of souls were scattered in the worn burgundy vinyl booths. A couple of weary-looking cops, a student surrounded by textbooks, an elderly man reading a newspaper with a magnifying glass. It was perfectly, blessedly anonymous. He slid into a booth in the farthest corner, the cracked vinyl cool against his skin. He picked up the menu, encased in plastic so thick it had yellowed with age. The prices felt like a typo. He could buy 1,000 of their all-American Grand Slams and not notice the expense. "Be with you in a minute, hun," a voice called out from behind the counter. The voice was tired, but clear, like a bell that had been rung too many times. Julian looked up, and the carefully controlled world he had built for himself fractured, then shattered. The waitress was clearing a table, her movements economical and sure, honed by 1,000 shifts. She wore a simple black polo shirt, the diner's name embroidered in faded red thread over her heart. Her dark auburn hair was pulled back in a simple, practical ponytail, but rebellious strands had escaped to curl around a face he would know in the depths of hell. It was thinner than he remembered, the cheekbones sharper, more defined by struggle than by youth. There were fine lines around her eyes, the delicate etchings of worry and sleepless nights. But the eyes themselves, a startling, intelligent shade of hazel that could shift from green to gold in the light, were the same. The stubborn, determined set of her jaw was the same. It was a Lara Finch, a tidal wave of memories, so vivid it was disorienting, crashed over him. Northwood Prep, class of 2008. Lara Finch hadn't just been a classmate. She had been his rival, his intellectual equal, his constant infuriating challenger. She was on a scholarship, a fact the old money snobs never let her forget, and she wore it like armor, outperforming every single one of them with a fierce, quiet grace. While he was a prodigy in mathematics and economics, she was a force of nature in literature and history. Their debates in AP government were legendary, clashes of two razor-sharp minds that left their teacher breathless. He remembered her not for her brilliance alone, but for her memory. It was unsettling, almost supernatural. She could recall verbatim passages from books she'd read once, years earlier. She could perfectly recount conversations, arguments, lectures. The teachers called it an eidetic memory. Their classmates called it a parlor trick. Julian, who dealt in data and patterns, recognized it for what it was, a superpower. He remembered her dream. She was going to go to law school, but not for a corporate firm. She wanted to work for the Innocence Project. She spoke of justice with a fire that was both terrifying and magnetic. "The system is just code, Julian," she'd once argued with him in the library, "and it's full of bugs. I want to be the one who debugs it." There had been a current between them, an unspoken acknowledgement of two minds that operated on a higher plane than their peers. He had almost asked her to the senior prom, a moment of impulsive vulnerability he'd quashed with his usual cold logic. The moment passed. He went with the daughter of a banking executive. He couldn't remember her name, and now here was Lara Finch. The woman who was going to debug the American justice system was in a Greasy Spoon diner, her phenomenal mind occupied with tracking coffee orders and side dishes of hash browns. The injustice of it, the sheer cosmic wrongness, struck him with a physical force. She turned, her eyes scanning the room, and for a heart-stopping moment, they met his. He felt a jolt, a flicker of recognition in her gaze, but it was gone as quickly as it came. He looked down at the menu, his pulse hammering against his ribs. She didn't recognize him. Of course she didn't. He was just another face in the shadows. The intense, gangly youth from Northwood was gone, replaced by a man chiseled by years of high-stakes negotiation and relentless self-discipline. He wore his success like a bespoke suit of armor. She approached his table, a small dog-eared notepad in her hand. "Sorry for the wait. What can I get you?" she asked, her voice a low alto, professionally neutral but laced with an exhaustion that made him ache. Up close, the details were sharper, more painful. A small, silvery scar above her eyebrow he didn't remember. The way her shoulders slumped ever so slightly, as if carrying an invisible weight. Her fingernails were short and unpolished, the hands of a worker, not a lawyer. "Coffee," he managed to say, his own voice sounding thick and unfamiliar. "Black." "You got it," she said, scribbling on the pad without a second glance. She turned and walked back to the counter, her posture a testament to a long shift. He watched her go, his mind a chaotic storm of questions. What happened? What happened to Yale Law? What happened to the Innocence Project? What happened to the fire that was Alara Finch? He stayed for nearly 2 hours, nursing that single cup of burnt coffee. He watched. It was what he did best. He saw the easy kindness she showed the elderly man, calling him by name and making sure his toast was just right. He saw the no-nonsense efficiency with which she handled the cop's complicated orders, reciting them back from memory without checking her pad. And then he saw something that made his blood run cold. A man in a cheap suit, reeking of stale cigarettes and entitlement, was sitting at the counter. When Alara refilled his coffee, he let his hand linger on her arm, a fraction of a second too long. "You know, a pretty girl like you shouldn't be working so hard," the man said with a leering smile. "When do you get off?" Alara pulled her arm back smoothly, her expression unreadable. "My shift ends when it ends," she said, her voice polite but with a core of steel. "Anything else I can get for you?" The man's smile curdled into a sneer. "Just the check, sweetheart." He left a pathetic tip, a rage white-hot and pure, unlike anything he felt in a hostile takeover, surged through Julian's veins. The sheer grinding indignity of it, that this brilliant woman had to endure the casual insolence of pathetic men just to make a living. This wasn't a problem he could solve by simply writing a check. To offer her money would be a profound insult to the proud, fierce girl he remembered. It wouldn't restore her stolen future. No, this required something more. This required a strategy. When Alara brought him his check, he placed a stack of $100 bills on the table. All the cash he had on him. $2,000. It was an absurd, ridiculous amount. She saw the money and her eyes widened. She opened her mouth to speak, a protest already forming. "It's not a mistake," he said, keeping his voice low, his face angled down, hidden by the beanie. "For your service, and for your patience." Before she could argue, before her incredible memory could place his voice, or his face, he slid out of the booth and walked towards the door. "Sir, wait," she called after him. He didn't turn. He pushed the door open and stepped back into the biting Chicago wind, the diner's tinny bell marking his retreat. He was no longer a phantom. He was a man with a purpose. The mystery of Alara Finch's broken promise was a puzzle he would solve. And as for the world that had done this to her, Julian Vance made a silent, chilling vow. A reckoning was coming. Sleep was a luxury Julian rarely indulged in, and that night it was an impossibility. The silence of his penthouse was no longer peaceful. It was accusatory. The sprawling city lights no longer looked like a kingdom at his feet. They looked like a maze that had trapped the most brilliant person he had ever known. Ilara's face, etched with a weariness that went beyond physical exhaustion, was burned into his mind. It was a stark, painful contrast to the vibrant, defiant girl who had once, during a debate, called his economic theories mathematically elegant but morally bankrupt. He'd been incensed at the time. Now, surrounded by the elegant, empty trappings of his success, it felt like a diagnosis. By 4:00 a.m., he was in his home office, a minimalist space of chrome and glass overlooking the waking city. Julian Vance was not a man who operated on hunches. He had built his empire on data, on exploiting inefficiencies, on understanding every variable. He needed to understand Ilara's variables. He made a call to a number that existed only in his encrypted contacts. "Walter, it's me." Walter Pierce was a man who lived in the gray spaces, a former MI6 agent who had found a second, more lucrative career in corporate intelligence. He was, in reality, the most thorough and discreet private investigator money could buy. He had unearthed corporate saboteurs and vetted hostile board members for Julian for years, always with the precision of a surgeon and the subtlety of a ghost. "Julian?" Walter's voice, a dry British murmur, came through the secure line. "This is an ungodly hour, even for your brand of capitalism. Let me guess, a rival firm is attempting to poach your lead quant." "Something more significant," Julian said, his tone clipped and final. "I need a complete, deep background file on an individual. Priority Alpha. I want it yesterday." "Name?" "Ilara Finch, Finch, 34 years old. Northwood Prep, class of 2008. Last known location is the Greasy Spoon Diner on Clark Street." There was a brief, pregnant pause. Walter was likely recalibrating from investigating hedge fund managers to diner waitresses. "Priority Alpha, understood. What is the objective? Are we looking for leverage? A vulnerability?" "No," Julian commanded, his voice sharp. "The objective is understanding. I want her entire life story since June of 2008. University records, employment history, financials, family status. I want to know why a woman who got a full scholarship to Yale Law is pouring coffee for a living. I want to know about her family, parents, siblings. And Walter, tread softly. This is not an asset evaluation. This is delicate." "Delicate is my specialty, Julian. You'll have a preliminary report by sundown." The day was a charade. Julian moved through his meetings like an automaton, his mind 1,000 miles away. He dissected earnings reports, approved acquisitions, and terminated underperforming assets. But his focus was singular. His team, a collection of the sharpest minds from Wharton and Harvard, noted his distraction. They saw the storm brewing behind his calm, gray eyes, but knew better than to ask. For the first time in his professional life, something mattered more than Vance Capital. At precisely 6 p.m., as the last light bled from the sky, a multi-encrypted file landed in Julian's private inbox. The subject line was a single word: Finch. Julian dismissed his staff, locked his office door, and poured himself a glass of Macallan 25. His hand was unnervingly steady. He opened the file. The story that unfolded was not one of personal failure, but of profound, heartbreaking sacrifice. It was a story of the system's bugs that Ilara had wanted to fix, instead catching her in their merciless logic. The report confirmed her acceptance to Yale Law, complete with glowing recommendations that spoke of a once-in-a-generation legal mind. She had attended for 2 full years, her grades placing her at the top of her class. She was on the law review. She was a star. Then tragedy struck. In the spring of her second year, her younger sister Maya, a bright, aspiring medical student, was involved in a catastrophic car accident. A drunk driver had run a red light. Maya survived, but barely. She was left with a severe traumatic brain injury and extensive physical damage that required years of round-the-clock specialized care. The driver was underinsured. The family's own insurance policy had a lifetime cap that was exhausted within the first 6 months of Maya's hospitalization. The costs were astronomical, a relentless, crushing avalanche of medical debt. Their parents, a high school history teacher and a librarian, liquidated their retirement, sold their family home, and declared bankruptcy. It wasn't enough. Ilara had tried to stay in school. The report included frantic emails between her and the dean of students, requests for emergency loans, for leaves of absence. But the gravity of the situation at home was too strong. She was the one who could navigate the labyrinthine medical and legal bureaucracy. She was the one who could fight with insurance companies. She was the only one. The report contained a copy of her official withdrawal letter. It was a single devastating sentence. "Due to a catastrophic family medical crisis, I must withdraw from my studies to become my sister's primary caregiver and financial support." She had come home to Chicago and taken on the full weight of her family's survival. Walter's report detailed a decade-long odyssey of grueling, low-wage jobs: overnight stocker at a grocery store, medical transcriptionist, and for the last 4 years, the double shifts at the Greasy Spoon. Every penny she earned went to the private care facility where Maya now lived, a place that provided the therapy and support she needed, at a cost that consumed Ilara's entire existence. A hot, unfamiliar sting pricked Julian's eyes. It was rage, the sheer, grinding injustice of it. A system that could allow one person's reckless act to utterly decimate a family, to steal the future of a brilliant woman and chain her to a life of servitude. The world had taken the sharpest mind he had ever known and tried to blunt it with exhaustion and despair. But she hadn't broken. The report made that clear. She had endured. She had sacrificed her own life to preserve her sister's. Walter's report also included a short, ugly addendum on the diner's patrons, specifically the man from the night before. He was a low-level real estate broker with a history of complaints for harassment, a predator who preyed on those he perceived as powerless. Julian closed the file. A cold, crystalline purpose settled in his chest. His initial vague notion of helping her was gone, replaced by a mission. He would not just help her, he would restore her. He would give her back the life that was stolen. But how? A direct cash payment was still a non-starter. He knew the Ilara Finch from Northwood would have seen it as the ultimate condescension. The woman forged in a decade of hardship would spit it back in his face. Her pride was the one thing the world hadn't managed to take from her, and he would not be the one to strip it away. He paced the length of his office, the city lights a glittering carpet below. He needed to give her an opportunity, not a handout. A position so uniquely suited to her extraordinary talent that accepting it would be a logical, not an emotional decision. He thought of her memory, that stunning, flawless recall. In his world, information was the ultimate currency. The ability to process and retain it perfectly was a weapon of immense power. An idea began to form. It was audacious. It was unorthodox. It was perfect. Vance Capital was in the final stages of a hostile takeover of a rival firm, Thorne Consolidated. The deal was mired in complex litigation. The head of the firm, Marcus Thorne, was an old money brute Julian knew from his social circles, a man who believed rules were for other people. Thorne's lawyers had produced tens of thousands of pages of discovery documents. A deliberate document dump designed to overwhelm Julian's legal team, to hide needles of crucial information in a continent of haystacks. His lawyers were drowning, complaining that details were inconsistent, that timelines didn't match, but they couldn't pinpoint the specific deception. They were looking for a bug in the code. Ilara was a debugger. He picked up his phone and dialed his head of legal affairs, a ruthless bulldog of a lawyer named Robert Sterling. "Robert," Julian began, his voice imbued with a newfound energy, "we're changing our strategy on the Thorne acquisition. I'm bringing in an outside consultant to review the discovery documents." "A consultant?" Sterling sounded baffled. "Julian, we have the best M&A team in the country. Who could possibly—" "Her name is Ilara Finch," Julian cut in, leaving no room for argument. "She has a unique analytical skill set. I want you to draw up a short-term, high-value consultancy contract. Pay her a fee that would be insulting to refuse. 6 figures for a month's work. Give her a secure office, a terminal with full access to the Thorne files, and a team to support her. I want it ready by morning." "Julian, with all due respect, who is this woman? What are her credentials?" "Her credentials," Julian said, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips, "are that she's the only person I believe can find what you've all been missing. This is not a request, Robert. This is a directive." He hung up. The plan was in motion. He would approach her not as Julian Vance, the ghost from her past, but as the CEO of Vance Capital, with a legitimate, critical business problem that she, and perhaps only she, was equipped to solve. It was a calculated risk, a lie of omission built around a greater truth. Her talent was real, and he desperately needed it. And as for the man at the diner counter, Julian made one more call, this one to Walter. "Walter, the real estate broker from your report. I want to know everything about him. His business, his loans, his partners. Find his pressure points. I want to own him by the end of the week. The game was afoot, and Julian Vance never ever played to lose. 2 days later, Julian found himself parked across the street from the Greasy Spoon in an unremarkable black sedan. The wind was still a bitter predator. In a leather portfolio on the passenger seat lay a consultancy agreement that could change Ilara's life, and a single crisp business card. He wasn't offering charity, he was recruiting a specialist for a high-stakes mission. That was the narrative. He had to believe it himself. He timed his arrival for the mid-afternoon lull. Through the window, he could see her, refilling salt and pepper shakers with a weary efficiency that tore at him. He took a deep breath, the cold air burning his lungs, and got out of the car. The tinny bell rang. Ilara was at the counter, her back to him, arranging coffee cups. "Seat yourself. I'll be right with you," she said, her voice tired and automatic. "Actually," Julian said, his voice quiet but clear in the near-empty diner, "I'm here to see Ilara Finch." She froze. The sound of her formal name in this place was an anomaly. Slowly she turned. Her hazel eyes, clouded with fatigue, slowly focused on him. He saw the gears turning behind them, that incredible mind accessing a deep, archived file. Recognition dawned, not as a jolt, but as a slow, creeping flood of disbelief, followed by a shadow of something else: suspicion, embarrassment, a deep, painful awareness of the chasm between their two lives. She instinctively smoothed down her apron, a gesture of profound vulnerability. "Julian Vance," she breathed, her voice a ghost of what it once was. "What in God's name are you doing here?" "Hello, Ilara," he said, offering a small, tight smile. He felt more exposed than he had in any boardroom. "It's been a long time. 16 years, a different lifetime, and a few dozen cover stories on Forbes, from what I've heard," she replied, a flash of her old, acerbic wit cutting through the weariness. Her posture stiffened. "If this is about that tip the other night, you need to know I tried to return it. The manager put it in the safe and said it was an anonymous donation to the diner." "I didn't take your money, Julian." "I know," he said, "and this isn't about that. May I sit? I'm here on business." Her eyes narrowed. "Business? What kind of business could you possibly have in a place like this?" But she gestured with her head towards the corner booth he'd occupied before. "You have 5 minutes, then my dinner rush starts." He slid into the booth, placing the portfolio on the table. She sat opposite him, her arms crossed, a defensive wall built of years of disappointment. The air between them was thick with unspoken history. "So," she began, her voice brittle, "spit it out, Vance. Did you decide to buy the diner for a nostalgic thrill?" The sarcasm was her shield. He decided to lower his own. "No, I'm here to offer you a job." She stared at him, then let out a short, harsh laugh devoid of any humor. "A job? Doing what? Polishing your collection of Fabergé eggs?" "Reviewing legal documents," he said, pushing the portfolio across the table. "My company, Vance Capital, is in the middle of a hostile takeover. The opposing firm, Thorne Consolidated, has buried us in discovery documents. We believe they're hiding evidence of financial misconduct, fraud, but my legal team can't find the smoking gun. They're too close to it. We need a fresh perspective. We need someone who can see patterns others miss. Someone who can absorb vast amounts of information and spot the single, critical inconsistency." He paused, letting his words hang in the air. "I need someone with a memory like yours, Ilara. I remembered you. I remembered how your mind works." She stared at the portfolio as if it were a bomb. She didn't touch it. "That was high school, Julian, a lifetime ago. I'm a waitress." "You're the most intelligent person I've ever known," he stated, not as a compliment, but as a fact. "And I'm in a situation where I need intelligence more than I need pedigree. Open it." Hesitantly, she reached out and opened the portfolio. She saw the official Vance Capital letterhead, the title, Special Consultant, Thorne Acquisition Task Force. Then she saw the compensation package. Her breath caught in her throat. The number was obscene. It was more than she could make in a decade of working double shifts. She snapped the portfolio shut. "No," she said, her voice shaking with a potent mix of anger and wounded pride. This is a pity party, Julian. A grand dramatic gesture from the billionaire to save the poor girl from his past. I don't want your charity. I don't need it. This is not charity, he insisted, leaning forward, his voice low and intense. This is a transaction. I have a problem. I believe you are the solution. The compensation is commensurate with the value you would provide if you succeed. This is a real job, Ilara, on a real project that is critical to my company. Your past doesn't matter to me. Your present circumstances don't matter. All that matters is your ability. Do you still have it? Why me? She shot back, her hazel eyes flashing with the fire he remembered. You could hire 100 Ivy League lawyers, a dozen forensic accountants. Why come to a greasy spoon diner and dredge up a ghost from 16 years ago? This was the critical moment. He had to give her a truth she could accept. Because they've all failed, he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Because they're all looking at the words on the page. But I need someone who can remember the 1,000 pages that came before it. I'm not hiring a lawyer. I'm hiring a memory. I'm hiring your mind. The one that could quote Locke and Rousseau in the same sentence while diagramming the fall of the Roman Republic. Is that mind still in there, Ilara? She stared at him, her defensive walls beginning to crack. The righteous anger was being replaced by a flicker of something else, a dawning, terrifying hope. Just then, a portly man with a permanent sneer and a stained tie emerged from the kitchen. Finch, Table 6 is complaining about their cold fries and you're sitting here gabbing. Get to work. He eyed Julian with suspicion. This guy bothering you? Before Ilara could respond, Julian stood up. He wasn't overtly threatening, but his presence seemed to suck the air out of the room. He radiated an aura of immense, quiet power. Ms. Finch and I are concluding a business meeting, Julian said, his voice as cold and sharp as broken glass. And I would advise you to reconsider your tone when speaking to a consultant for my firm. The manager scoffed. Consultant? She's a waitress. Her daily consulting fee, Julian said, looking the manager dead in the eye, is more than your annual salary. She is considering an offer from me, and if I were you, I would go back into that kitchen and pray she accepts it. Because if she stays here, I will buy this diner, and my first act as owner will be to personally fire you. My second will be to have the health department conduct an audit so thorough they'll find bacteria from the Truman administration. Do we have an understanding? The manager's face went from ruddy to ashen. He looked at Julian's tailored coat, at the quiet confidence that screamed old money and new power, and sputtered, nodding dumbly before retreating back into the kitchen. Julian turned his attention back to Ilara. She was looking at him with wide, astonished eyes. He had not just offered her a job, he had slain one of her daily dragons right in front of her. The offer is real, he said softly, his voice once again calm. The problem is real, and I believe the solution is you. Read the contract. Have a lawyer look at it if you want. My car will be outside tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. If you're in it, you're accepting. If you're not, I'll understand. He placed his business card on top of the portfolio. The choice is yours, Ilara. No pressure, just a business proposition. He turned and walked out of the diner, leaving Ilara Finch in the worn vinyl booth, the smell of stale coffee in the air, holding a contract that represented an escape route to a life she thought had died 16 years ago. In front of her was not an act of pity, but a challenge. A dare to believe that the brilliant girl she once wasn't a ghost after all. The next morning at 7:59 a.m., the back door of a gleaming black Audi A8 opened. Ilara Finch, dressed in the only decent pantsuit she owned, slid into the plush leather interior. She said nothing. She didn't have to. The choice had been made. The Vance Capital headquarters was a blade of dark glass and steel that sliced into the Chicago sky. It wasn't a building. It was an argument for the sublime power of capital. Stepping into the lobby was like entering a modern art museum curated by a god of commerce. Ilara felt a profound sense of dislocation, as if she had accidentally slipped into a parallel universe. She was met not by a receptionist, but by a calm, polished executive assistant who escorted her to a secure floor. Her new office was a corner suite with a panoramic view of Lake Michigan. On the desk was a state-of-the-art encrypted computer terminal, and a stack of paper files nearly 3 feet high. "This is the first batch of the Thorne discovery," Robert Sterling, Julian's head of legal, explained. He was a man who looked like he'd been born in a pinstripe suit, his skepticism about her presence barely concealed. "Mr. Vance has given you full autonomy. My team is at your disposal." He left, closing the heavy door behind him, leaving Alara alone with the mountain of paper and the ghost of her former life. For the first 2 days, she was paralyzed by imposter syndrome. The silence of the office was deafening after the constant clatter of the diner. She read the documents, but the words seemed to float off the page. What was she doing here? What had made her think she could do this? On the third day, Julian came to her office. He didn't ask about her progress. He simply placed a cup of coffee on her desk. "It's from that place on the corner," he said. "Tastes like burnt ambition. I figured it would feel more familiar than the sludge our machines produce." It was a small gesture, but it was an anchor. It was an acknowledgement of where she came from, without judgment. "Thanks," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Alara," he said, his tone serious, "forget who you were for the last 10 years. Forget the diner. Forget me. Just you and the data. Find the lie." His words broke the spell. She wasn't a waitress anymore. She was a debugger. She dove in. The work was grueling. She worked 16-hour days, fueled by caffeine and a desperate burning need to prove him right. She didn't just read the documents. She absorbed them. Her brain, starved for intellectual challenge for a decade, came roaring back to life. She built timelines in her head, cross-referenced shipping manifests with board minutes, memorized entire depositions. Slowly, patterns began to emerge. A series of small, seemingly insignificant shipping insurance claims from a subsidiary in Singapore. A footnote in an auditor's report from 3 years prior that mentioned minor logistical write-downs. A name, a low-level customs official in Singapore, that appeared once on a visitor log and then vanished. Separately, they were nothing. But in Alara's mind, connected by her flawless recall, they formed a constellation, pointing to a dark, hidden star. Marcus Thorne was creating phantom shipments of high-value electronic components, insuring them, then reporting them as lost in transit through a corrupt customs official, pocketing the insurance payouts. It was a multi-million-dollar fraud, elegant in its simplicity and buried under a mountain of plausible deniability. She found the lie. She prepared a concise 10-page memo citing the specific document numbers, dates, and names. She walked into Julian's office, placed it on his desk, and said, "There's your bug." Julian read the memo, his expression shifting from intense concentration to a slow, spreading look of absolute admiration. He looked up at her, and for the first time, she saw him not as a billionaire or a ghost from her past, but as the brilliant, intense boy she had once known. "I knew it," he whispered. "I knew you could do it." The fallout was swift and brutal. Armed with Alara's memo, Julian's team ambushed Thorne's lawyers. Faced with irrefutable, meticulously documented evidence of fraud, Thorne consolidated, folded. The takeover was completed for pennies on the dollar. Julian had won, but he knew it was Alara who had delivered the fatal blow. He made her consultancy permanent, creating a new department for her. Head of Special Projects, a division of one, tasked with seeing the patterns no one else could. The salary was life-altering. The first thing she did was move Maya to the finest long-term care and rehabilitation facility in the country. The second was to set up a trust that would ensure her parents could retire in comfort. For the first time in a decade, the crushing weight on her shoulders was gone. A new tentative relationship began to form between them. They had dinner, not as a boss and employee, but as two equals. They talked for hours, bridging the 16-year gap. She discovered the profound loneliness beneath his controlled exterior. He discovered the unbroken core of strength and wit beneath her scars. It wasn't a whirlwind romance. It was a slow, careful process of discovery, built on a foundation of mutual respect that was stronger than any fleeting passion. But Marcus Thorne was not a man who accepted defeat. Humiliated, his company gutted, his reputation in tatters, he festered. From the ashes of his empire, he watched Julian Vance and the mysterious consultant who had ruined him. and his rage fixated on her. He didn't just want revenge on Julian. He wanted to destroy the woman who had been his instrument of ruin. He wanted to drag her back down into the gutter he felt she belonged in. The attack, when it came, was not aimed at Vance Capital's finances, but at its soul. It was the night of the annual Symphony Ball, the crown jewel of Chicago's social calendar. Julian had insisted Alara attend with him. She was hesitant, the world of couture gowns and old money still feeling alien to her. But he was insistent. "You're a part of this world now, Alara," he'd said. "It's time you took your seat at the table." She wore a simple, elegant emerald green gown that brought out the gold in her eyes. As she walked into the grand ballroom on Julian's arm, she felt a flicker of the confidence she used to have. Heads turned, whispers followed them. The diner waitress was now the billionaire's confidant. And then she saw him. Marcus Thorne, standing by the grand staircase, a venomous smirk on his face. He intercepted them, a glass of champagne in his hand. "Vance," Thorne sneered, his eyes raking over Alara with open contempt. "I see you brought your research assistant." "Tell me, darling," he said, turning his full attention to Alara, his voice loud enough for the surrounding guests to hear. "What's the going rate for a waitress's loyalty these days? Does he let you use the main entrance to his penthouse? Or do you still have to come up through the service elevator?" The air grew thick with tension. The nearby conversations died down. This was a public execution. Julian stepped forward, his face a mask of cold fury. "Thorne, you have exactly 1 second to walk away." "Or what?" Thorne laughed, emboldened by the audience. "You'll sue me? You've already taken my company. What's left?" "No, I think it's time everyone knew the real story. About how St. Julian Vance here plucked this nobody from some greasy spoon, not because of her talent, but because of his pathetic white knight complex. He bought you, my dear, a pretty tragic story to make himself feel like a man." Alara felt the blood drain from her face. Every insecurity, every fear she had about her new life was being laid bare for the city's elite to see. She felt Julian's protective anger, but before he could act, she held up a hand, a gesture so small yet so commanding it stopped him cold. She turned to face Marcus Thorne, her expression not one of hurt or anger, but of calm, chilling focus. Her mind was working, connecting dots. Thorne's public humiliation was a distraction. What was his real play? Her eyes scanned the crowd, her memory cataloging faces. She saw Thorne's former CFO, a man named Peterson, lurking nervously near the exit. She saw a notorious tabloid journalist known for his corporate takedowns, smiling like a vulture. And then she overheard it, a snippet of conversation from two men standing behind Thorne. "The server transfer is complete," one said. "Peterson uploaded the final package. The journalist gets the exclusive at midnight." The pieces clicked into place with blinding speed. This wasn't just a social attack. Thorne was leaking Vance Capital's proprietary trading algorithms, stolen by his mole, Peterson, to the press. He wasn't just trying to humiliate Julian, he was trying to cripple his company from the inside out. She looked Marcus Thorne dead in the eye. "You're right about one thing, Marcus," she said, her voice clear and steady, cutting through the silence of the ballroom. "I was a waitress, and I learned how to handle pathetic, insecure men who need to throw their weight around to feel important. But what I'm doing now is far more interesting." She took a small step closer. "For example, I'm finding it interesting that your former CFO, Mr. Peterson, who is currently sweating by the exit, just completed a data transfer to a server registered in the Cayman Islands. A transfer you authorized at 9:15 p.m. from your own phone." Thorne's smirk faltered. "What are you talking about? That's insane." "Is it?" Alara continued, her voice gaining strength. "I also find it interesting that Lee Maxwell," she said, nodding towards the smirking journalist, "is scheduled to receive an anonymous tip at midnight containing Vance Capital's source code for the Atlas algorithm. A little parting gift from you, I imagine? An attempt to trigger a federal investigation and tank Julian's stock price on Monday morning?" The color drained from Thorne's face. Peterson, by the door, looked like he was about to bolt. The journalist's smile vanished. "You see, Marcus," Alara concluded, her voice dropping to a near whisper, but heard by everyone in the stunned silence. Julian's mistake was thinking you were a businessman. I knew from the start you were just a common criminal. And like all criminals, you're sloppy. You talk too loudly and you trust the wrong people. She glanced at the two men behind him who had just gone pale. And well, my memory is perfect. She turned her back on him, took Julian's arm and said, I believe our business here is concluded. As they walked away, leaving Marcus Thorne standing alone, exposed and defeated in the center of the room, Julian looked down at her, his face a mixture of awe, relief, and a love so profound it left him breathless. She hadn't needed him to save her. She had just saved him. The aftermath was not a storybook ending, but a slow, methodical process of justice. An emergency injunction filed that night froze the data transfer. Peterson, faced with evidence of his digital trail, confessed everything. Marcus Thorne was arrested before the night was over, not for his public outburst, but for felony corporate espionage. Alara's life settled into a new normal, but one of her own making. She wasn't just Julian's partner in life. She was his partner in business, her unique mind a critical asset to his empire. She established a foundation, funded by Vance Capital, that provided legal and financial support to families devastated by medical debt, debugging the very system that had once trapped her. Months later, they were standing on the balcony of his penthouse, the city glittering below them. It was a different view now. It wasn't his kingdom, it was their city. All the data in the world couldn't have predicted this, Julian said softly, looking at her. My analysts, my algorithms, none of them could have accounted for you. Alara leaned her head against his shoulder, watching the endless stream of headlights, each one a story. That's because you were always looking for the variable, Julian, she replied. You forgot to look for the person. He took her hand. It was not the hand of a billionaire saving a waitress. It was the hand of a man who had been saved from his own gilded cage, holding the hand of the woman who had taught him the true meaning of value. Together they had faced the storm and emerged not into a perfect, cloudless sky, but into a real world, full of flaws and challenges, that they would now face as equals.